Think of just a question you could ask them. Once you hear their response, match their mood. If they're upbeat, be upbeat.
I think if it's a small class, maybe a 6 or 8 bed reformer class, you could say something about, what kind of coaching do you respond well to? Do you want hands-on or hands-off? Or have you done this kind of training before?
If you take time to sort of get to know them a little bit first, it just makes both parties relaxed, and then all of those questions that you'll then come on to, they'll be much more open.
My name is Jack Thomas. I'm one of the co-founders of The Fit Guide, which is the global standard of fitness excellence. Welcome to the 5-Star Fitness Podcast, which is all about bringing the very best from hospitality into the fitness industry so we can build better, more profitable businesses and we can positively impact more people. I am joined today by Matt Lavender, co-founder of The Fit Guide, and today we're going to dig deeper into a concept that we've covered in previous episodes, which is this concept of mind the gap. And this is really the thing which separates the 5-star clubs from the Award of Excellence or 4-star clubs. So if you want to create 5-star experiences for your members in a 5-star club and gym and experience, this will definitely be a great episode for you. And we're really going to be digging deeper in the next few episodes. We're going to start off with the G of mind the gap, which is genuine interest. And really the foundation of that, in my understanding, is asking questions. So, Matt, what do you teach the top hospitality brands about the power of asking questions?
As you say, Jack, within genuine interest, there's different ways of getting to know your guests or clients. And, the most obvious way is asking questions. And so when I work with hotels and we go through this, we first of all, we talk about why would you ask questions? What's the reason for doing so? And I suppose there's a few things. Well, first of all, it's to show the guests that we care about them, that we're interested in them, that we want to make them feel at home. We want to build that connection, build that rapport. And it also is a great way to start to think about what can we learn from them that is going to make their experience better, and so that will lead on to, in a few episodes time, when we talk about anticipatory service, because you're trying to gather information. And I think what's important to remember is there's always lots of questions that any business has to ask their clients, customers, guests as standard, which are more technical questions. For example, if you're making a reservation, what time do you want to come? But then, things like that. But really what we're talking about here is things which is just general chit chat mostly, and just the sort of things that you would ask your friend if you were going out for dinner with them or meeting them for a beer or something like that.
Yeah, let's zone on that word genuine.
Yes.
Right? It's one thing to show interest, but what makes a question genuine?
Yeah, this is super important. And as a hotel inspector, there was that standard: did staff members express a genuine interest in you, such as by asking questions? And you could ask a question and still not get a yes for that, because there are certain things that we would look for when someone was asking a question. First thing is that it was asked in a warm manner. So we talked about tone of voice in a previous episode, but the way you ask it, your actual voice when you ask it, can make it sound genuine. That's the first thing. But then the second thing is that there is a response. So if somebody asks you a question, but then it's quite clear that they haven't listened to the answer, they haven't responded to it, and they just maybe move on to the next part of whatever they're doing, whether it's a check-in or whatever, that would, again, not sound genuine. So I do a lot of training on that sort of ask a question, listen to the response, and then you respond in turn before you move on. And so I know, I've got examples of this. I think so have you, Jack, where with, staff members have asked questions, but it's quite clear that it wasn't really genuine.
I think in hotels you probably see that more, because I think a lot of gyms just aren't doing it full stop. So they'll just go through the very basics of the check-in. You're in the class, this is where you get your water or whatever, and that's kind of it. But I think in hotels, I guess they're sort of told to say it every time, or let's say trained, and inspired hopefully to do it every time. But can you think of an example, let's say, of an ungenuine question or when that's happened to you?
Yeah, just going back to what you said, for sure they'll often be trained to ask questions, but I think rarely are they trained on what I would say the art of asking questions. So to give you an example, I'll be checking into a hotel, and very often they'll say, how was your journey? But they're sort of looking down at their screen, typing things, trying to assign a room or whatever. So it's just sort of to fill a bit of time. How's your journey? Now, I could either answer positive or negatively, and let's say I say, well, actually, it was a bit of a long journey. I've, traveled all the way from England, didn't get much sleep. And then they're like, and can I get your passport, please? And it's like, okay. And so, the best hotels, they would say and respond something along the lines of, well, I'm sorry to hear that was a bit of a challenging journey for you today, Mr. Lavender, but you're here now, and I'm sure you'll get time to relax. And again, even if it was positive, I said, yeah, it was great. You can say, oh, so pleased to hear you had a great journey, but some kind of response. You get it with checkouts as well, where people ask how your stay was, and they obviously weren't listening because they just move on.
Well, I feel then it's even worse than just not asking any question.
Absolutely.
They say, oh yeah, it was actually a nightmare journey. My flight got delayed 15 hours, and they say, okay, can I have your passport, please? You're almost like a bit annoyed. Like, why did I even bother telling you?
Yeah, right. I mean, and then when we talk more about the art of asking questions, we say think about engaging your guests and clients, not just about the past, but also about the present and the future. So obviously you could say, how was your journey? But you could say, how are you feeling today, present? Or you could say, what do you have planned for your stay? And actually by asking questions about the future, that actually really helps you to start to think of ways you can offer anticipatory service, because you might they might tell you, for example, I'm really looking forward to, maybe doing a bit of shopping whilst I'm here, and then you could send them to their room some information about shopping options. So ask questions about past, present, future, open-ended questions rather than just closed questions as well. Yeah. So there's a few different things that you can do to sort of ask questions in a better way.
It makes me think in the fitness industry how we can do maybe something like that. I think if it's a small class, maybe a 6 or 8 bed reformer class, you could say something about, what kind of coaching do you respond well to? Do you want hands-on or hands-off? Are you verbal? Something like that, so that you could help. It's not really interest, right? It's a bit of a different area, but I think just trying to think in the fitness industry how we can use these things to deliver a better experience. I think certainly, have you done this kind of training before? It's kind of like it's getting information about their past, but it's also showing some interest in them as well.
Yes.
Kind of blends together a little bit. And then, of course, you can use that. Oh, I've never done strength and conditioning. Oh, okay, don't worry, we're going to look after you and going to make sure you're all right. So, how else can we use that in the fitness industry, do you think?
Well, I think you could sort of categorize questions into different buckets, perhaps, because I think before you even get to that point where you're asking them about their previous training or what they hope to get, maybe their fitness goals, just start off with like really simple sort of chit-chatty questions. So, how's your day today? How's everything going? Have you come from far today? Do you live locally? They always say that in any sort of, not just a sales conversation, but any negotiation or any interaction between two people, if you take time to sort of get to know them a little bit first, it just makes both parties relaxed, and then all of those questions that you'll then come on to, they'll be much more open to answer those in an honest way, because you've already broken the ice.
Do you think that it can be taught, this, or do you think it comes naturally to some people? Because honestly speaking, this comes very naturally to me. I find it quite easy. If someone comes in I've never met before, I'm like, if it's a foreigner, I'll always ask something along the lines of, are you based in Bangkok? How long have you been here? And I do actually want to hear their answer. I quite like meeting people. I wouldn't say I'm particularly extroverted, but I just, it's partly part of my job, right? But also it's quite nice to know people's stories. Sometimes you have a good chat. But some people, of course, I guess, the examples you gave when they ask how was your journey and they don't even listen, I guess obviously they don't, in that moment at least, they don't really care. So how much could this be? Can everyone do this?
I think everyone can do it. You're absolutely right. Some people are much more natural at doing it. For some people, that's just who they are. They're the kind of people that always ask questions to somebody else before they start talking about themselves. Other people, it takes a little bit of work. So, when you start thinking about these concepts like Mind the Gap, and it becomes part of your culture as a business, then you encourage people, whenever they're having an interaction, always try and find one question that you could ask somebody, and then do role plays, do practice, and really go through that. Think of a question you could ask someone. Ideally personalised as well, not so personalised that you don't want to delve into people's private business, but I mean more. In a hotel we would say, if it's a honeymoon couple, rather than just say, oh, how was your flight today? You might say something like, oh, where did you get married? Or if it's a business traveller, You might say, will you get any time to relax whilst you're here?
Right.
If it's a solo traveler, with a backpack, have you been anywhere else nice on your journey? Because once you start making those chit-chatty questions more personalized, again, it comes across as much more genuine. So what I normally do when I'm training, and this is probably helpful to people who it doesn't come quite so naturally, I say, look, here are some different guest profiles. Think of just a question you could ask them that would kind of break the ice a little bit, and then once you hear their response, respond to it in a positive way, match their mood. If they're upbeat, be upbeat, kind of acknowledge it in your answer. So for example, if you ask those honeymooners, where did you get married? And they said, we got married in the Bahamas. Oh, wonderful. I've heard the Bahamas is wonderful, beautiful. I've always wanted to go. And then you can move on. So yes, it can seem when you do these role plays that it's sort of like faking something that should become natural, but ultimately, if it doesn't come naturally to people, you have to train on it. So I think it can be done. It's much easier for people to whom it comes naturally.
I mean, ultimately, real life is kind of like that, right? You bump into someone you haven't seen for a while, like an old work colleague, or maybe even a family member, and you kind of have to do this anyway. So I think in real life, we have to fake it a little bit to a certain extent.
Right.
So I think it's fine to expect people at a gym or a hotel to also do the same thing
absolutely.
as well, I think. Okay, what's any other tips do you have for sort of front desk members of staff? Let's say they're going to be the first people, of course. Coaches, of course, can do this as well. Any other little tips to help them do this?
Yeah, I think as we said earlier, just always think of a question that you could ask, and I would say keep the first question quite simple, not too prying into people's personal business, because it's not mandatory that you ask somebody question after question after question. You really have to match the mood. So this is where a little bit of emotional intelligence maybe comes in. Ask a fairly simple question to start off with. How's your day been today? And then really gauge from their answer to what extent that person is open to have more of a chat.
Thermostat, right?
There is this idea of the sort of service thermostat, and someone's particular service thermostat could differ from day to day even. And I think I often look at the example of guests checking into a hotel. If you've just come off a 1 hour flight and it's 2:00 in the afternoon, you might be happy to stand there and answer questions all day and engage. But if you're arriving at 11 p.m. after a 12-hour flight, you're probably less likely to want to engage. So ask a simple question to break the ice, see how they respond, make sure you respond to that.
Sometimes it's hard to shut them up. You say, do you live around here? And 5 minutes later, I'm very sorry I have to serve the next client.
It can be different culturally. Different cultures are more likely to engage in personal conversations with people they don't know very well. But if I think a good tip is if that person answers in a way that is clear that they don't want to engage, respect that and use what they call a statement of care. So you can just say, well, I hope you have a wonderful workout today. And that's it. And that kind of closes it. And it says, I understand you don't really want to talk too much today. I respect that, but have a great day.
The interesting thing about that is we've had times at our gym when they've come in a bad mood and they haven't wanted to talk, but the front desk have delivered great service. And often at the end they'll say, I'm really sorry, I was in a bad mood when I came, but thanks, that was great. I really needed that when they walk out the door. And it just goes to show if you still maintain your professionalism and you still deliver great service, you can still have a massive impact on them. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. It's and I really like that way of just having a statement that you practice. It could be like maybe 1 or 2 different ones that you say, and that just closes the interaction really positively. And then if they want to come back to you and chat later when they're feeling a bit more open or they've woken up a little bit, they can do. My final question on this one is, are there regions or areas in your experience where people don't want questions of genuine interest? Because I spoke to a gym owner in one particular region and we were going through their report and they said, well, they didn't score this particular standard. They said, people in our city don't care about that. And I know that's not true because I know people that live in that city. It's a very international city. And I felt like it was a little bit of a cop-out and a little bit of an excuse. And I just feel like this is something that really does cross cultures. It might be done in slightly different ways, but I think people like to universally for other people to care about them. Is that fair, or are there any regions where people just don't want anything like this?
I think there are certainly, if we wanted to sort of stereotype, there are maybe cultures that are traditionally considered a little bit colder on first meeting anyway. I think actually even those cultures that people traditionally think of as cold, often it's not that they're cold, actually they just take a little bit longer to warm up to people, and they like to sort of suss people out a little bit more before they would engage in those conversations. But I've been very fortunate. I mentioned the other day I've travelled to many countries. I've met people from all over the world, and I can honestly say I've never met a culture where I could say every single person from that country doesn't like to have a conversation. I've met wonderful, open, engaging people from pretty much everywhere I've met. So again, I don't think you can't. I don't think that's fair to use that as an excuse and just say people from my city or my culture, they don't do that. And look, in most of the international cities that we're traveling to, they've got people from everywhere coming anyway. So you're telling me that everybody who comes from, I know, Sweden suddenly turns at this country and suddenly becomes cold and not wanting to talk just because they're there. So that doesn't quite ring true to me. I think it's fair to say there are different cultures that maybe you have to approach it in a different way, but no, I would say start off with a nice simple question to start with, that's something that most people wouldn't be offended with, and then take it from there.
I think the question that you had, are you planning, are you going to get any time off to see the city? I think that's quite, how was your day is actually quite, it could be like, it's terrible, it can bring up some bad feelings from them, but something like that I think is like an easy one. So have a few of those in your back pocket. I think that's certainly impactful. This has been interesting, Matthew. Thank you. Certainly some ideas for our team as well at my gym. If you believe that we need to infuse more of hospitality's principles into the fitness industry, this is the podcast for you. Please do like this video just to give it some support, and also subscribe so you get regular updates on the future episodes that we put out. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on a future episode of the 5 Star Fitness Podcast.